The Apache call the Sierra Madre the Blue Mountains. The range of 9,000-foot peaks runs for 100 miles from the Sierra El Tigre south to the Bezvispe Valley. 3 rivers bisect it, the Rio Eros, the Rio Bezvispe, and the Rio Yaqui. The Rio Bezvispe guards the isolation of the Sierra Madre. The Continental Divide flanks the range on 3 sides. The mountains mark the border between Chihuahua and Sonora. Hidden deep in the mountains are small fertile plateaus. It is hot in summer, but the temperature can fall to freezing when the sun slips behind the ridges. It isn't a landscape for timid men. It's a vast, menacing land dominated by mountains and sharp rocks, precipitous cliffs, snakes, jaguars, and wild cats. It is a place for retiring armadillos and badgers, the benign white-tailed deer, brightly plumaged parrots. It was a killing ground where Apaches fought Mexicans and Americans with no quarter asked or given. And it was home to the last free, independent Apache who dovetailed with this wild place snugger than a mortise lock. Jock McNeil, formerly of the Confederate Navy and Stan Wade's mounted rifles, stood at the cliff edge of the rancheria, raised his arms to the sun, and sang the morning song. He was giving thanks to Ussen, the god of the Apache, for the heavenly gift of the love he had known with his wife Miriam, and for the lives of their son and daughter. Jock wasn't a man who received divine grace on his knees. Ussen had given the land to the Apaches, even though the White Eyes took it from them and their government broke its promises. Ussen had also given Jock back his spirituality, replacing the primitive Catholicism which had slipped away when he was in his early teens, now nearly 6 decades past. Jock's voice, strong in the low registers, wavered on the higher notes, but strengthened as he offered his gratitude to Ussen for his protection from enemies and the bounties of the rancheria. Suddenly the heat of the sun vanished. A crushing sensation pierced Jock's heart, and he grew cold. Perhaps this was his time to die, and he hoped it wouldn't be painful. Slowly his thighs gave way, his arthritic knees collapsed under him. Raised arms dropped to his sides, and he fell to the ground. He lay twitching and shaking, his legs jerking so violently that he thought they might separate from his body. A foam of saliva gathered at the corners of his gaping mouth and hung on his cracked lips. But Ussen hadn't called Jock to the happy place, not yet. Ussen was sending the power. Jock could feel it. He was being asked to give another service for his people. Suddenly his soul left his body. He could feel a distant attachment to the shell lying on the ground, but he was transported to the old northern homeland. Homesickness and nostalgia swept through him as he saw his younger self with his wife and family in beautiful Oak Creek Canyon. Oh, that sweet, happy time, that lost paradise. Then the Chinasee touched his soul, and he was in the Pajarito wilderness, the place of deep sorrow, reaching with crooked fingers to touch the earth where the bones of his beloved Miriam and their son and daughter lay in the grave he had dug. He sensed danger nearby and looked up. An aged man sat beside him. Jock suspected he knew him, though the old man's face was blurred. Farther back, a group of Apaches waited. The young men and women looked at him expectantly, and the old people stared pleadingly, and he did not understand why this was so. Then he was once again in his body. Jock gradually recovered. Presently he got to his feet, wiped the saliva from his chin with the sleeve of his calico shirt. Kusuma, the old woman who looked after him and who was younger than he, stood by the side of his wickiup and beckoned him to breakfast. Jock wasn't ready to eat and subdued his desire for coffee, pretending not to hear her calling. He adjusted the ties on his long moccasins, doubled over and fastened them at the knee. He admired Kusuma's deft work on the curled-up toes which protected his feet from thorns and cactus spikes. Jock felt around the leggings, smiled as his hand rested on the pair of derringers hidden there. The derringers were old and well preserved, each one primed with 244 rounds, fatal at close range. If he were cornered and disarmed, he might fight his way out, or shoot himself if it came to that. Jock adjusted his long breech-clout, unfastened and fastened the buckle of a leather Mexican cavalry belt, and played with the position of the sheathed bowie knife hanging at his left side. "Jock," Kusuma yelled, "the coffee'll be cold." He tried to walk confidently to his wickiup, ignoring the torment in his knees, but Kusuma was not fooled and spotted his ill-disguised limping. Jock sat in the arbor of his wickiup, facing the sun and thinking. He liked to sit here when he had a decision to make. The vision from Usson had added to his power, and he felt stronger, confident that he could do whatever Usson desired of him.